Or So good morning. We're reading the 14 lessons in yogi philosophy and Oriental occultism. We're starting here on so we're ending the first lesson. This is the summary or the mantram, they call it, of the first lesson. A mantram is a word, phrase, or verse used by the Eastern people in order to concentrate upon an idea and to let it sink deep into the mind. It is similar to the statements or affirmations used by the mental scientists and others in the Western world. The mantra for the month is a verse from a Western poet, Mr. Orr. Lords of a thousand worlds am I, and I reign since time began, and night and day in cyclic sway shall pass while their deeds I scan, yet time shall cease ere I find release, for I am the soul of man. Commit this verse to memory and repeat it often, letting the mind dwell upon the idea of immortality expressed so strongly, remembering always that you are the I referred to. So now we're moving on to the second lessons, which are the mental principles. In our first lesson, we called your attention briefly to the three lower principles of man, that is, the physical body, the astral body, and prana or vital force. We also led up to the subject of the mental principles, which form the fourth, fifth, and sixth, respectively, of the 7 principles of man. For convenience sake, we will again enumerate the 4 higher principles: spirit, spiritual mind, intellect, instinctive mind. This terminology is more or less unsatisfactory, but we adopt it in preference to the Sanskrit terms, which prove so puzzlingly and elusive to the average Western student. The 3 lower principles are the most material, and the atoms of which are composed are, of course, indestructible and go on forever in countless forms and aspects. But these principles, so far as the ego is concerned, are things merely to be used in connection with a particular earth life, just as man uses clothing, heat, electricity, etc., and they form no part of his higher nature. The 4 higher principles, on the contrary, go to make up the thinking part of man, the intelligent part, so to speak. Even the lower of the 4, the instinctive mind, goes to form the higher part of the man. Those who have not considered the subject at all are apt to regard as absurd the suggestion that the mind of man functions on more than one plane. Students of psychology, however, have long recognized the varying phases of mentation, and many theories have been advanced to account for the same. Such students will find that the yoga philosophy alone gives the key to the mystery. Those who have studied the dual mind theories of certain Western writers will also find it easier to conceive of more than one plane of mentality. At first, it would seem that the conscious reasoning part of man's mind did the most work, if indeed not all of it. But a little reflection will show us that the conscious reasoning work of the mind is but a small fraction of its task. Man's mind functions on 3 planes of effort, each plane shading imperceptibly into the planes on either side of it. The one next higher or the one next lower. The student may think of the matter either as one mind functioning along 3 lines, or as 3 minds shading into each other. Both views have more or less of the truth in them. The real truth is too complex to be considered in detail in an elementary lesson. The principal thing is to get the idea fixed in the mind, to form mental pegs upon which to hang future information. We will touch briefly upon the several minds or planes of mental effort, beginning with the lowest, the instinctive mind. This plane of mentation, number 4, the instinctive mind. This plane of mentation we share in connection with the lower animals in at least its lower forms. It is the first plane of mentation reached into the scale of evolution, Its lower phases are along lines in which consciousness is scarcely evident, and it extends from this lowly place in the scale until it manifests a very high degree of consciousness in comparison with its lowest phases. In fact, when it begins to shade into the fifth principle, it is difficult to distinguish it from the lowest forms of the latter. The first dawn of the instinctive mind may be seen even in the mineral kingdom, more particularly in crystals, etc. Then in the plant kingdom, it grows more distinct and higher in the scale. Some of the higher families of plants show even a rudimentary form of consciousness. Then in the world of the lower animals are seen increasing manifestations of the instinctive mind from the almost plant-like intelligence of the lower forms until we reach a degree almost equal to that of the lowest form of human life. Then among men, we see it shading gradually into the fifth principle, the intellect, until in the highest form of man today, we see the fifth principle, intellect, in control to a certain extent and subordinating the fourth principle to it, either wisely or unwisely. But remember this, that even the highest form of man carries about with him the fourth principle, the instinctive mind, and in varying degree uses it or is used by it. The instinctive mind is most useful to man in this stage of his development. He could not exist as a physical being without it, in fact, and he may make a most valuable servant of it if he understands it. But woe to him if he allows it to remain in control or to usurp prerogatives belonging to its higher brother. Now, right here, we must call your attention to the fact that man is still a growing creature. He is not a finished product by any means. He has reached his present stage of growth after a toilsome journey, but it is merely sunrise yet, and the full day is far off. The fifth principle, the intellect, has unfolded to a certain degree, particularly in the more advanced men of today, but the unfoldment is merely beginning with many. Many men are but little more than animals, and their minds function almost entirely upon the instinctive plane. And all men of today, with the exceptions of a few very highly developed individuals, have need to be on guard lest the instinctive mind does not occasionally unduly assert its power over them when they are off their guard. The lowest phase of the work of the instinctive mind is akin to the same work manifesting in the plant kingdom. The work of our bodies is performed by this part of the mind. The constant work of repair, replacement, change, digestion, assimilation, elimination, etc., is being performed by this part of the mind, all below the plane of consciousness. The wondrous work of the body in health and sickness is faithfully carried on by this part of our minds, all without our conscious knowledge. The intelligent work of every organ, part, and cell of the body is under the superintendence of this part of the mind. Read in the science of breath of the marvelous process of the circulation of the blood, its purification, etc., and realize faintly what a wonderful work is even the lowest phase of the instinctive mind. We will show you more of its working in our forthcoming work, Hatha Yoga, but any school physiology will give you a clear idea what it does, although its writer does not tell you the cause behind it. This part of the work of the instinctive mind is well performed in the lower animals, plants, and in man until the latter begins to unfold a little intellect. When he often begins to meddle with the work properly belonging to this plane of mind and sends it adverse suggestions, fear, thoughts, etc. However, this trouble is but temporary, as when the intellect unfolds a little farther, it sees the error into which it has fallen and proceeds to rectify the trouble and to prevent its occurrence. But this is only part of the province of the instinctive mind. As the animals progressed along the scale of evolution, certain things became necessary for its protection and well-being. It could not reason on these things, So that wonderful intelligence dwelling subconsciously in the instinctive mind unfolded until it was able to grasp the situation and meet it. It aroused the fighting instinct in the brute for its for its preservation. And this action of the instinctive mind, very good for its purpose and essential to the preservation of the life of the animal, is still with us and occasionally projects itself into our mentality with a surprising degree of strength. There is a great deal of the old animal fighting spirit in us yet, although we have managed to control it and to hold it in restraint, thanks to the light obtained from our unfolding higher faculties. The instinctive mind also taught the animal how to build its nest, how to migrate before approaching winter, how to hibernate, and thousands of other things well known to students of natural history. And it teaches us how to do many things which we perform instinctively, as it also assumes tasks which we learn how to perform by means of our intellect, and which we will pass on to the instinctive mind, which afterward performs them automatically or nearly so. It is astonishing how many of our daily tasks are performed under the direction of our instinctive mind, subject merely to a casual supervision of the intellect. When we learn to do things by heart, we have really mastered them on the intellectual plane and then pass them on to the instinctive plane of mentation. The woman with her sewing machine, the man who runs his engine, the painter with his brush, all find the instinctive mind a good friend. In fact, the intellect would soon tire if it had these everyday tasks to perform. Note the difference between learning to do a thing and then doing it after it has been learned. These manifestations of the instinctive mind are, of course, among its higher phases, and are due largely to its contact with and blending with the unfolding intellect. The instinctive mind is also the habit mind. The intellect, either that of the owner of the instinctive mind or of some other man, passes on ideas to it, which it afterward faithfully carries out to the letter, unless corrected or given better instructions, or worse ones, by the intellect of someone. The instinctive mind is a queer storehouse. It is full of things received from a variety of sources. It contains many things which has been received through hereditary, other things which have unfolded within it, the seeds of which were sown at the time of the primal impulse which started life along the path, other things which it has received from the intellect, including suggestions from others, as well as thought waves sent out from the minds of others, which have taken lodgment within its corridors. All sorts of foolishness as well as wisdom is there. We will deal with this phase of the subjects in future lessons under the head of suggestion and autosuggestion, thought power, etc. Instinctive mind manifests varying degrees of consciousness, varying from almost absolute subconsciousness to the simple consciousness of the highest of the lower animals and the lower forms of man. Self-consciousness comes to man with the unfoldment of the intellect and will be spoken of in its proper place. Cosmic or universal consciousness comes with the unfoldment of the spiritual mind and will be touched upon later. The gradual growth of consciousness is a most interesting and important branch of the subject before us, and will be referred to and spoken of at different points in this course. Before we pass on to the next principle, we must call your attention to the fact that the instinctive mind is the seat of the appetites, passions, desires, instincts, sensations, feelings, and emotions of the lower order, manifested in man as well as in the lower animals. There are, of course, higher ideas, emotions, aspirations, and desires reaching the advanced man from the unfolding spiritual mind, but the animal desires and the ordinary feelings, emotions, etc., belong to the instinctive mind. All the feelings belonging to our passional and emotional nature belong to this plane. All animal desires, such as hunger and thirst, sexual desires on the physical plane, all passions, such as physical love, hatred, envy, malice, jealousy, revenge are part of it. The desire for the physical, unless as a means of reaching higher things, the longing for the material all belong to this plane. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life are on this plane. The mental principle is the most material of the three mental. This principle is the most material of the three mental principles and is the one which is apt to bind us the closest to the earth and earthly things. Remember that we are not condemning material or earthly things. They are all right in their place. But man in his unfoldment grows to see these things as only a means to an end, only a step in the spiritual evolution. And with clearer vision, he ceases to be bound too tightly to the material side of life, and instead of regarding it as the end and aim of all things, sees that it is, at the best, only a means to a higher end. Many of the brute instincts are still with us and are much in evidence in undeveloped people. Occultists learn to curb and control these lower instincts and to subordinate them to the higher mental ideals which open up to them. Be not discouraged, dear student, if you find much of the animal still within you. It is no sign of badness or evil. In fact, the recognition of it by one is a sign that his unfoldment has begun. For before, the same thing was there and not recognized for what it is, whereas now it is both seen and recognized. Knowledge is power. Learn to know the remnants of the brute nature within you and become a tamer of wild beasts. The higher principles will always obtain the mastery, but patience, perseverance, and faith are required for the task. These brute things were all right in their time. The animal had need of them. They were good for the purpose intended. But now that man is reaching higher points on the path, he sees clearer and learns to subordinate the lower parts of himself to the higher. The lower instincts were not implanted in your nature by the devil. You came by them honestly. They came in the process of evolution as a proper and right thing, but have been largely outgrown and now can be left behind. So do not fear these inheritances from the past. You can put them aside or subordinate them to higher things as you journey along the path. Do not despise them, though you tread them underfoot. They are steps upon which you have reached your present high estate, and upon which you will attain still greater heights. I'm going to pause here.
That's interesting. Do you think it's similar to the monkey mind we've been talking about, the instinct one?
I don't know. That's a good question. I almost feel like, I don't know, maybe if Amanda is here and can answer that, she might know better because I'm not as familiar.
Not that that really has a strict definition. It's just the term we've been using for like when you just go with your, where you're led by your mind versus you yourself leading your mind. That makes no sense what I just said. I realize it.
Yeah, I feel like that's right.
I think that's still part of intellect though, because it's at least I feel for me, the monkey mind is when my mind is not so much instinctual stuff. It's when my mind is racing through the past or the future, usually the future. That's the kind of, but I don't think that's so much instinctual. I think the instinctual stuff is how we deal with stress. That's the way as I was listening to you read and reading along, I was kind of putting it in that category where he's saying, a lot of the things we are aware of now, so you can put it kind of in its place, but that fight or flight response, sometimes you still don't have control over that. And we have, you know, stress responses to things that we shouldn't have a fight, you know, that if you stop, if your intellect pays attention to it, your intellect can say, no, this is not a life or death situation, but sometimes our body still reacts to it as if it is. And we have that stress response. And that's where yoga comes in for me. So I feel that I have that less now. That stress response probably less now than I used to years ago, because I'm more aware of it and I can use my breath to get me through all sorts of things. It's funny, even my son, who is not a yogi and who is very resistant to most things, you know, starts to smirk if I bring up any yogi philosophy or anything when I'm talking to him. He did say yesterday he's the best man for his friend's wedding, and he's arranging the bachelor party, and it's very stressful to him because people are backing out now and it's this weekend and he's already booked things and so he was very stressed. He said, I was using my deep breath a lot today. He says, that's what got me through it. And I was like, good. So at least he might roll his eyes anytime I say something, but it's actually sinking in just a little bit.
Sinking in, yeah.
But that's that kind of fight or flight, you know, where we start to get, the adrenaline starts to pump, or you start to get upset about things. And if you recognize it, you go, you know, my breath can bring me out of the way I said, when I talk to kids about it, when I teach the kids in class about this, I talk about, you know, the emotional mind, and we touch the back of our heads and we say, this is where we get all those emotions, all the good and bad. But when they're all very heightened, we want to be able to use our breath to bring us back to our brilliant brain right here. And so, you know, there's that understanding of the science of it. The breath calms the, you know, the nervous system. And we've come to accept that in this day and age, not just yogis, but lots of people like my son have come to accept that the breath works like that. The breath is, you know, a physical vehicle that you can use to consciously calm yourself down. So I think that's the little space between the instinctive mind and the intellectual mind. We can use the breath to kind of cross over back into, that's my take on it.
I agree with you, Jackie. I was going to say, I think for me, I would think the monkey mind is more the intellect, because that's what begins to separate us from the animals, is that we have the intellect, they stop at the instinctive mind. So you don't really see dogs and cats sitting around having to do all this work because they don't have the intellect part. I'd like to think, Jackie, you planted the seeds into your son's intellect mind, which then fell into his instinctive mind. And like, that's the whole idea of like the planting the seeds. Like,
right. Even though he's resistant to the planting, they got there somehow anyway.
Yeah. But we have to be like that. It works, but we have to be mindful of what other people are planting in our heads too, because eventually they do fall down and they take root. And like, you know, like thinking about all the unlearning I've had to do and relearn it the right way, the truthful way.
Mm-hmm.
It's messy. It's messy down there. I love this sentence that said, such students will find that yogi philosophy alone gives the key to the mystery. Like, there's so many answers, like to let you know, like they say there's no written manual for life, but it's like maybe there is, because you just have to read these texts and they have a lot of the answers. And I think like that, and we talk about building habits in the Yoga Sutras, that idea of doing things for a long period of time over and over in all earnestness. And they talk about it here. When we learn things by heart, we really have mastered them on the intellectual plane and then pass them down to the instinctive plane of meditation. It's important to me what kind of habits I'm building in my life, because eventually they do become part, and not just like the brushing your teeth and tongue scraping every morning, but like how you're responding to people and learning to make eye contact with people when you're talking to them, and the phrases we're using, especially now, like learning all the how to be anti-racist, like things that I used to say probably weren't okay. And I didn't even realize I was saying them, like stuff like that. To me, it's important to me to unbuild those habits and build healthier ones for me. So, and it goes back to that, like every opportunity is the opportunity to serve or express gratitude. And I just love that. And it will help me build habits that I feel are healthy for me in life.
I'm with you, Pam.
And it's funny watching animals, like how, like you see it with your dog. Like I saw it with Kramer all the time, how simple their life was, because they didn't have that intellectual mind like taking over all day. Like all they want to do is like walk. Actually, I would argue all they want to do is just be loved and love you. Like that's it. And that was actually something that came up in the Gita course I took yesterday that I forgot about. So I'm quoting him, but he said, Krishna cares for us infinitely. The secret is how to love God, which you can put universal energy there. Or in the more secret is how to be loved by God. You can argue that with the animals. They just want to love and be loved. That's all we want as humans too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this I mean, I have an advantage because I have highlighted stuff when I read it the first time. So I highlighted self-consciousness comes to man with the unfoldment of the intellect. That's the hard part, the self-conscious, when it comes toward the intellect part of the mind. But I guess we'll learn more about that one tomorrow when we read intellect. All right, well, let's move on to breath work. I've been targeting 8:10, which is not good because that is running us over. So we can start breath work now, unless anyone has anything else to share. And then we will meditate.
My cat's meowing. I don't think she's gonna let me meditate first.
Oh, I saw my friend Danielle has a cat, and I got to see her, and Danielle had to go grab her. She wouldn't come to me.
Oh yeah, cats are weird like that.
Can you see it, or is it blurry?
Oh yeah, it's so cute. Oh.
This is Coco, and she had another one, Nellie, like Coco and Chanel. Because that's just how Danielle is. But Nellie passed away right before COVID, and I'm grateful she went before COVID because she was suffering. She had cancer, and Danielle had to bring her to the vet all the time. But it would have been a lot and stressful to deal with that in New York City during COVID. So
yeah,
I'm glad she went peacefully and wasn't suffering. But Coco's a good cat. They have 3 cats. Her sisters each have a cat too. And it's just funny watching cats interact because they all got little attitudes or big attitudes.
Yeah. The craziest things about cats is that they all have they act differently. Like I've never met 2 cats that act the same, whereas dogs kind of sort of act almost all the same.
Yeah, if you have 3 dogs in the house and they don't get along, it's not going to work. But you have 3 cats in the house that don't get along, they just like go to I feel like cats almost have a little bit of intellect because they're like so much smarter than we are. But like they just have like they'll be having a standoff staring contest at each other, and then they just retreat to their rooms. Like dogs would never do that. Dogs would just like attack each other.
Yeah.
So it's funny. Or they just like go hide under the bed, the cats.
Oh yeah. They do that too.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
I'm tired today. Okay.
all right. Well, if you sign off early, have a good day. Let's
You
start
too.
doing some alternate nostril breath. Just sitting up nice and tall.
Thanks for reading, Pam.
Yeah. Thanks for joining. Taking a few breaths in through the nose and out through the nose. And then taking your right hand over to the nose. Close the right nostril with the thumb. Inhale through the left. Close left. Exhale right. Inhale right. Close right. Exhale left. Inhale left. Close left. Exhale right. Inhale right. Close right. Exhale left. Few more rounds on your own breath, adding your locks of retention if it's part of your practice. When you feel ready, if you haven't, you'll exhale out the left side. Begin to settle into your meditation. There's no rush. I'm setting the timer and you'll join us when you're ready. Bringing hands to heart center. Namaste.